last logistical question is, if we drop, is there a way to drop the lights so that we get a better, you know? Okay. Great. All righty. Thank you. Ah, perfect. Very good. We want you concentrated on the screen, not on the bright lights. All right. Hey, Deborah, should I just dive right in, or you want to? And Richard.
Richard gets up here. Any planning commissioners or council members or project management need a
Good morning. I'm Richard Townsend, Planning Director, as you all know. I want to welcome you here. This is a sort of an all-day event for Lawrence and the rest of the staff. We're working on a new master plan for the Villages at Cascade Head property. And Lawrence is here to explain some of his preliminary ideas and then do some more exploration up in the Villages property later today. So it's one step along our trail, and there'll be many more yet to come. And we hope to have this done around the end of the year, first of the year. So Lawrence is our principal architect on this project, and quite experienced with urban design and so on. And I'll let him take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Nice to be back here. Let's see how we do this. Bump into that. Well, as Richard was saying, this is this in our scope actually for the project. This is actually part of our design process. So I've got a set number of hours to start putting together planning concepts and an approach to working with this, significant piece of property and amazing resource that the city has now. I've been out to the site several times already, and I want to get back up there today and start verifying some of the approaches to the layout of the land. We have some great base mapping, topographical, slope analysis. We've analyzed the previous plan for the Villages. That's helped us to understand how somebody else is looking at the property and their take on it. But we also, are coming with a fresh look, and wanted to get some feedback, just show you how we're beginning to think this through. So it's really several legs here of, what's the community here viewing this property for, and what are the opportunities there, and getting up on the site and verifying our understanding of the landscape, the relationships, the connectivity, of course, is something you'll be hearing me speaking about quite a bit. So this first image, of course, is an iconic one of, this is not from somebody actually flying over. This is the amazement of Google Maps, that you can get down at various angles and see, but it is very close to an actual photo from up there. Just a couple of overviews that, of course, any of you can pull up on Google Maps and take a look at, with the knoll on the right, Cascade Head way off in the upper right-hand corner that this is named for. What's that? Rhodes End is right about through here, and I believe this is in this Cascade Head way out there, and then this being the knoll. And I still have to get the names. I have them written on my maps, but what is this curving road? Devil's Lake Boulevard. And then the other one here, Voyage, right? I have those labeled on the maps. I have to keep getting these names in my mind. And then Salasea coming across here and then ending right about there. Well, ending down in the valley and then winding its way up into this portion of Rose End. And so that, the potential of future connectivity through here is, and the building of neighborhoods in this general area. This being the boundary of the property, because I can see the grid of the Holly Farm, and of course the property goes way off of this view over to the east, and actually connects all the way out to 101 eventually. This is a big overview. I always like just sort of positioning ourselves again. We all know where we are, but this is a map I drew many years ago for several of the projects I was doing up and down the coast between Nell Scott and up in southern Washington. And just recognizing again where Lincoln City is in relationship to the coastal highway, to I-5 and the Willamette Valley, and the major population centers of Portland and Salem and Eugene, and that Lincoln City is in this remarkable location sort of between those three main towns and cities inland. The village's plan. We've studied this a good deal and read through the applications, previous ones, and come to understand, what a lot of the thinking might have been here. And we want to propose some significant changes. I like this map in that it connects itself all the way down to 101 and shows a connection from Lake Boulevard going up and a road coming up and looping up and coming back down around through Salasee as sort of a big looping collector road, I suspect was the thinking there. The properties here that reach out to 101, it doesn't seem as if they were making a main connection through, but in fact cul-de-saced a road that came further out. I'm hoping maybe there would have been some kind of connection happening here. We see very clearly the greenways, the stream corridors, those natural corridors. I had to ask and research quite a bit, what's the differentiation between the light green and the darker green here. My understanding, well, actually that is the town center, not a dark green, but along here it looks as if there was an extra buffer that was being added to that green. So the lighter green I understand to be jurisdictionally required to be preserved. And the yellows and the sort of reddish brown being two levels of medium density and a lower single-family density in the yellow. But what I'm seeing in this first initial blush, and with this one connection here I'll point out as well, streetwise, is that there's sort of a collector and local street, arterial collector, local street approach to traffic planning, which is the way that we've been planning road systems throughout America for the last half a century or more. And I have a slide coming up that sort of critiques that sort of a limited way of limited connectivity, that instead of having only a collector and some cul-de-sacs or small pocket neighborhoods that pull off of that big collector, let's think about more of a broader network and a grid of streets. And when I say grid, I don't mean gridiron, I mean just a network. I've applied these red sub-areas to this plan and to the property in general. Area 1, Area 2, Area 3. Just from my initial perceptions of the breakdown of the landscape, mostly topographically. I would take away the plan that's below here and just recognizing that there's a very strong stream corridor here, as well as the branches that run north of that. And there's another branch of that comes south. And walking the land previously, I really saw that Area 3 is still a very heavily wooded, southern slope of the sort of a mountain that's up here where the knoll is up into the northwestern corner there. South of that in Area 1, all of those areas and properties with the existing North Devils Lake Boulevard running through have been much more altered already. It seems as if the forest, I recall, was lower there. It was cut maybe more previously, and that roads are already into that area number one. Seems like a logical place, especially since it is right up against and adjacent to existing developed areas around Voyage and then to the west around Rhodes End. Area 2 is kind of in between. It's got still some of the characteristics of Area 3, being heavily forested in large portions, but also having some development and some lanes and roads. I found a little road that made its way up through here and got into right about there. So I saw that there was a certain amount of alteration there as well, but not as much as Area 1. And I've left out this area because I understand it to now be part of the golf course, and then up to the far north, that even in the earlier plan was designated as a nature park or as a preserve. This is a diagram that I didn't produce, but my colleagues and mentors and professors from many, many years ago, Dwayne Plater-Zyberg, Andreas Dwayne and Liz Plater-Zyberg, created this diagram, very helpful in my earliest days of learning about town planning and urban design, in thinking about those two different ways of a conventional suburban sprawled way of disconnected streets, as I mentioned earlier, arterials connected to collectors, connected to local streets, which is the paradigm that all of our traffic engineering is based upon in the United States over the last 50 to 75 years. That's the northern side of this diagram, where you have a school that goes down to a collector or arterial, a single-family housing pod that is segregated from an apartment housing pod that is segregated from a big box, shopping center. On the southern side of this, all of those different uses are mixed together in a network of streets and smaller blocks. That provides you with a variety of different ways to go from, let's say, the single-family house over to the shopping center. You only have really one route, out onto the big arterial, up the arterial, into another collector, sort of a cul-de-sac, dead end. But if you wanted to go from a house way out here in the more traditional neighborhood, you could go through a variety of different streets, and you have lots of choices. And so that's a whole different paradigm shift, and it's sort of the fundamentals as to how I think about planning a neighborhood. Yes?
Mayor Williams, just want to ask a quick question. Why then was that the favorite method of back?
Well, so the question is, why was that? I'm assuming you're meaning the suburban model. How did that come into being? That would be why was that the preferred model of development? We could have a whole long discussion about it, but I think it was more of almost a notion of efficiency and systemization that enabled traffic engineers to quantify traffic and clarify it. It also had something to do with separation and segregation, the idea that the city had the mix of dirty industry, late 19th century, early 20th century industrial, belching plants, belching smoke, that was in and amongst the city. Pittsburgh, where I went to college many years ago, was one of those great cities that had that intermixing of the plant down by the river with the worker housing rising up above it, and it was considered to be that sort of a dirty integration of the places where people were working and living and shopping and doing all these things together. We wanted to separate those out, and it was the beginning of suburbanization. Leave the city behind, abandon the city, and move way out into the nice green suburbs in your single-family house with your single-occupant car. So there's a whole ideology that really our culture moved along through for years. Yes? Yeah.
It's built around the automobile, and it's built around cul-de-sacs, and people, just like you said, isolating themselves from others. We are now, because of the change in our society, actually going back. So our cycle is taking us back to where many of the cities we know the best were originally designed, but the suburbs got pulled away from it.
Thanks, Mayor Williams again. I'm just, and this is nitpicky, but I'm being sold a bill of goods here, okay? I'm being told this is sprawl and it's disconnected and it's segregated. But then we have neighborhoods, and neighborhoods are diverse and small. I feel like I'm being sold something here, instead of being told honestly why we're looking at this. And that's what my first question was, why was that so successful? It couldn't have been that horrible if that's what people wanted and used and built. And I sure would like to hear both sides of this as we move forward.
That's great. I appreciate it. I thought, well, we'll just move through this slide quickly and we'll get to the plan. But I very much appreciate your saying, let's go into this a little deeper. Why am I, seemingly selling a bill of goods that suburban sprawl bad, traditional neighborhoods good? Yeah, there's a lot behind it. I think one of the problems there's a number of problems that we find with the more suburban model of separating out the housing in single-family low density out on the edges. Now, there's a place for some of that. It's not to say in the traditional neighborhood that there isn't also single-family housing, or that it's a certain distance away from the center of town. It's not saying everybody should live in apartment buildings and single-family houses are bad. It's saying that we should think more in terms of networking of a series of neighborhoods and centers that are spaced closer to one another with a little bit more connectivity. That retail could be more in walking distance, located in smaller increments, in more frequent centers throughout a city's network. What that does, compared to the the suburban model, is potentially reduce traffic, because you're not having to travel for all of your daily needs by car. If you live far away, you have to go to the shopping center, you got to drive. You go to the school, it's a separate trip. You go to the office, it's another place. Now, inherently, we do a certain amount of that kind of moving around and driving, but when we can provide closer proximity and a good walking network and biking network, as well as shorter driving trips, we can reduce traffic, we can reduce congestion, and we can actually make communities that are probably a lot more enjoyable to live in than all of our daily needs being in the car.
I'd like to add a couple things to that, too. We find that now, I'm reading that more retirees are looking for a walkable neighborhood where they can get out and go to places without getting in their cars. We find that the young people, the early 20s, they don't want to own a car. They would rather be able to walk to places, or if they have a car, they don't want to rely on it on a daily basis. And, when we were doing a public involvement thing at the high school with the leadership group, one of the things they said is, I said, what would you like, in your community? They said, we'd like a place we could walk to from school. And when you think about it, they have to get out. How far do they have to go before they have a place, to go get a snack or, whatever. So it is a different, I think the paradigm is changing back to the traditional, and we see a lot of city centers revitalizing around that idea and becoming very, very popular with those groups.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different take, but it actually gets us to the same point. I think when you're talking about walkability and stuff like that, you're talking about urban areas, and we are not an urban area. And I don't think Americans have lost their love affair with cars. You know, when we were all kids, you had one car. Now you have a car for both parents plus their children. And so the trend, I think, is still to more cars. But that is also why the bottom one makes sense. Because whether you're walking or whether you're in a car, you have multiple routes to get to the same place. Everything on the top funnels it to one arterial street. And if you go to places, well, really, I'll just use the West. You go to Vegas, you go to Salt Lake City, you go to Boise, you go to any of these communities, and you'll find neighborhoods that are separated by massive arterial streets. And everything gets choked to those arterial streets. And there's very little alternatives or ways to get things around. So I don't think we've lost our love affair with cars. And that's why I think the multiple way of getting to different places is important.
I have to say that, just real quick, I would have been here about 30 to 40 minutes earlier if I had not. I had to go through a beautiful neighborhood of Selwood, if you all know it, down in the southeast, which is pretty much the southern end. But then I had to cross the Selwood Bridge, and it all funneled down to one, basically one lane. And I sat in traffic for 30 or 40 minutes, and I'm wondering if I think that's what's happening every single day now in Portland, is you're getting that bottlenecking down to one. We'll have those bottlenecks, but you described it well, that suburban model.
Sorry, I've got it now. I just wanted to say, Deanna Hinton, by the way, I just wanted to say that in the way in which you live in those two neighborhoods would be different. The above one, the more urban or suburban, is more isolated, and you do hop in your car to go everywhere, so you don't have that opportunity of bumping into your neighbors and getting to know them. So the neighborhoods idea down below, I think people would actually get to know their neighbors better, and that's something that I think we could use a little more neighborly, bumping into each other is all I can think of. The other thing at the bottom does too is it might draw people from outside of the neighborhood into your neighborhood, so that I'm not sure if that's a positive or a negative, but that's what I see when I look at these two options.
I would also add that there are communities that have been designed in this southern or the lower left, the urban neighborhood, that have actually protected downtown businesses, for example, by making them walkable and accessible to neighborhoods, as opposed to a walled community that we've seen in many areas where people are forced to get in their car, and if they're going to get in their car, they might as well drive to a big box as opposed to walking to the neighborhood stores. So,
Big box store with a big parking lot, and a big parking lot at the school, and a big parking lot at each destination.
I would say the southern section of the drawing here clearly promotes more diversity and is more vibrant. And what I notice also, it echoes the pattern of development that is already here in Lincoln City, where you had, 5 or 6 villages, where you could walk, if you lived in the village, to the corner store or the post office or the library or to the beach. And so I see Nelscott there. I see Taft there. It's what we are. Yeah.
That's an excellent point. That I'd actually say there's a little bit of both that are happening here in Lincoln City. A little bit of the concentrated, focused, walkable centers of each of those, the villages. The string of pearls, the Nelscotts, the Tafts. But you also do have, you've always had this issue of the one highway, the one big arterial that connects and links all of those. And inherently, there's going to be some more residential-only feeling a little bit more separated, not having a center. There's going to be some residences living a little further out. That's natural. You know, the work that we're just completing here with the Nell Scott Gap, we really addressed this issue of connectivity, parallel roads. So we now are planning a future parallel to Highway 101, east of 101 through the Nell Scott Gap area. The work that I did privately with Olivia Beach actually helped to create some new connections on the west side of 101, and a little bit more of a network that, you know, an average developer would have just said, no, I just want to put a couple cul-de-sacs in here and not have anybody driving through my community. No, I really worked with Casey Roloff in that case to say, let's make this connection. Let's make sure that we're thinking at the broader scale, not just of the houses you're selling here. So, well, this is great. I love the feedback and the discussion that's happened here, and to dig in deeper. But let me jump up to the actual villages plan that we've produced. I'm going to run through these things a little quicker. Another diagram, actually, by Dwayne Plater-Zyberg showing the idea of a transect from the center of a neighborhood to the edge, that you do actually accommodate still all of these, but just in smaller increments in a walkable urban neighborhood. So this is meant to actually say that this isn't your entire metropolis going from, you can see down on the bottom here, an urban, compact row houses and apartments to larger lot, single family, to, farm level, large suburban to national preserve. This is saying this happens within a 5-minute walk, within a quarter mile to a half a mile that you can actually walk within, not several miles. So where is the villages in this? I think the villages could be from this sort of very compact, we're showing maybe again, as I say, row houses and apartments and some single-family houses. And maybe there's a small number of larger, more upscale, large lots. And then great opportunities for natural preserves. And I think that's something I want to ask you all. Should we be retaining maybe more of the village's property as a preserve, and concentrating more into this level within this part of the neighborhood? I'm going to run through these quickly. These, you probably have shown these to you at some point through the years, but just some images of what happens when we gather people together. We create the heart of a neighborhood. Whether it's small retail shops, it just requires a cafe, a bistro kind of an environment on a small little main street. Can some of this be at the villages? Can we find that, even though it is off the beaten track? And by the way, that's another thing that happens when you have greater connectivity, a slower street connectivity and a finer grain and smaller blocks, is that maybe more people from the outside of your neighborhood can come into it and support a few businesses that otherwise probably would die on the vine if you only had a small residential neighborhood on the end of a dead end. Examples of how small little shops can be. This is a great one in Cannon Beach, but this is all the way back in New England. I thought it just appropriately scaled. A little apartment above, a little office above, a little shop below. Thinking about having great community gathering places, be they, these are sort of a civic level of institutions such as churches or grand lodges. This is the Quinault Lodge up in the Panhandle or in the Olympic Peninsula, and schools. That schools are well placed and distributed throughout the network of different centers throughout a city, through the different pearls. Again, so that you can walk or bike to school. This is the Selwood. This is Dunaway in my neighborhood in Eastmoreland. And that it's relatively small. It's 5.5 acres. Sometimes schools are much larger. So the idea of housing being closely clustered in around schools, or rather that schools are within neighborhoods, is a great idea. The standard subdivision, you know, thinking down at the level of the street, what's it like to go down streets that have continuous garage doors with setbacks? Even though this is a street with a sidewalk and a planting strip with trees in it, which is great, that detail, still these houses feel like they kind of turn their back, opposed to houses, well, these are alleyways. This is another way to do it. These are alleyways. Some of these, I think, might be here in Olivia Beach. Others might be up at Seabrook. This is an old traditional garage off of an alleyway in Portland somewhere. The idea of a little carriage house up above. You all know this approach well. And then the transect of, again, of center, general, and edge, so that you can have a main street, row houses in the next layer out, small lots, and then larger lots. So going from more urban to more rural within that walking distance. Some great places up and down the coast right here in Oregon, Cannon Beach. And houses can be tiny. They can be affordable both by size and by, and they can be well crafted. They can have a great front porch, a great presence to the street and to the sidewalk, instead of the continuous garage doors. And that parks are interdispersed, small parks. They don't have to be big. You can have big preserves on the outer edges of a neighborhood, but in the center, actually a fairly small park is the kind of place that can gather people together and be great places for celebrating or just kids to play in a playground. Olivia Beach, an example. And then finally, out of the outer edge, access to nature, trails. Tremendous opportunities here with the villages. Okay, the villages. These are some shots I took when I walked up there to the knoll and looked down. It's just absolutely spectacular, no doubt about it. What a great point up at the top there, and it's so wonderful now that is declared as being preserved and not built upon as the previous villages plan had, I understood. So what are some of the ideas that, we've been thinking through here? Exemplifying these best practices, walkable, diverse neighborhoods, living, working, shopping, learning, and playing in a neighborhood format and scale. Streets that are community places, not just parking lots. Walking and biking to and within the neighborhood. Housing for all stages of life. So those little tiny small affordable houses might be great for a single person or a couple, or a small apartment building. So there's something we call the missing middle. It's a new term that's been popping up over the last half a dozen years in the planning professions. Portlanders are using this a great deal now. The idea that there's a missing middle area of housing that the real estate market has not been providing throughout America, pretty broadly. Maybe in some of the greater urban centers you'll see more of this mix, but we pretty much have, and this is, I think, valid here to say here in Lincoln City, we have single-family houses being sold, and we've got some apartments being sold. And everything in between that traditionally we were seeing up until roughly the 1920s throughout America, throughout the world, has not been as readily being built. Duplexes, double houses, row houses, houses that look like single-family big houses but actually have small apartments in them. So types of housing that are higher density, more compact, but also fit beautifully and seamlessly into a neighborhood that also has single-family houses. So mixing it up more. And then, and that provides all those stages of life. You grow your family, you've got kids, you have you move into the big single-family house, perhaps. When you downsize, my son just went off to college, by the way, at UC Santa Cruz last week. I brought him down there. Big moment in our lives. And, my wife and I are thinking, are we going to downsize at some point? We got this big house now. And so, a traditional neighborhood, a variety of different kinds of housing in a neighborhood allows you to stay in the neighborhood after your kids have moved out and gone to college. You can still remain within that community. Did I have one more point there? Preserving and celebrating nature. That's a given here. Finally, let's get down to the map. This is a topographical map that we've got some printouts of. That is the base map for our work here. The boundaries you can see in this red line wrapping all the way around of the village's property. Again, connecting out to 101 there, coming closer down here, but not quite hitting it. The Holly Farm in the middle there. The road that we've mentioned a couple of times. Again, it's West Devils Lake Road. And then the stream corridors that are pretty significant. And I've got the delineation of the actual, edge on another map. The yellow, orangey yellow color is a slope analysis. It's 20% slope and above. So I would say pretty much at 20% slope, you're pushing it in terms of building on it. There are places in San Francisco, where they're building on incredible slopes, but for the most part, we don't need to go there. So what you'll find is that this area 1 that I had described as being adjacent to the existing development of Rhodes End. This area here is fairly low sloped. It's not rising into those heavy slopes. There's a little bit of slope right along the edge of the road here, but not much to worry about. You can fit housing and development into some small bits of 20% slope, but not too much more. As you go further out into this peninsula, there is a significant stream corridor in which you're seeing more of those heavier slopes. But there's the potential for some building, particularly south of this stream corridor and maybe south of this stream corridor in here. What is most concerning, though, in my evaluation, is something I really want to get up into the hills there today and really see in person. One concern with the previous villages plan is this whole northern area up along here. North of this stream corridor, I'm seeing, and I did witness it when I walked all through along this edge, walked up the street and walked all along here. I did see a lot of slope across and a fairly incised stream. Made it feel as if connecting roads across this would be pretty darn difficult. I believe the previous plan had a road coming up through here. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to do it. We can cut slopes, we can get roads in there. But I want to question whether building up into this whole northern area is really valid. Either we could ask the question as should, in the short term, maybe it's a phasing question. Maybe for the first phases of how this would grow, we concentrate down in this lower area that looks much more buildable. It's much closer to the existing street network. And maybe these are future phases for the long in the future. Because we've got a long way that I think all of the development of this would take. Or another way to pose that question is, how about that whole northern section north of that stream, perhaps just being preserved in perpetuity as part of the base of the knoll and that wilderness as a wilderness preserve? So that's a big question I want to sort of get us all thinking about. I'm sure you all have grappled with those thoughts. But we're going to lose potential density, or we're going to lose potential units. I bet that through the next generations and decades that there's going to be an increasing interest and ability for the market, for people to accept more of that kind of missing middle housing. That's not just large lots, single family, of which some can be here, but that there can be more opportunities for small houses, for apartments, for row houses, for duplexes, for more compact living, courtyard houses, that maybe could fill in a smaller land area and still achieve similar densities. That's just a supposition, but I think it is a reasonable one. This is an actual plan I've drawn now so far. So finally we've gotten to this, describing pretty much what I did. You'll see that north of that stream, I've left it all green. There's the knoll up to the top. I've sort of just, wrapped some of these streets around the Holly Farm and asking the question of could there be a connection all the way out here? Could there someday be perhaps, a road that went through the Holly Farm? Here's the existing North Devils Lake Boulevard Road. It makes a lot of sense to fill in there. I'm showing off of the property, sort of the expansion of this neighborhood. This exists in here along Voyage, but up in this area, I'm wondering if that's potential for developing and connecting into this neighborhood. So the big gesture here, as you can see, it's kind of a bullseye. There's a center there. I said, well, let's make a center. And that's the existing curve of Devils Lake Boulevard that I think dead ends right around there before it hits that stream corridor. And it just looks like kind of a natural center. It happens to be up above, a higher elevation than the land here. So conceivably, if we were to have streets that went straight on out to the ocean here, I believe that you could look down that street, be it from this center or whatever this thing is, or anywhere along that street, and you'd actually see the horizon, if not down to the water, and actually maybe see the breakers. Who knows? There's forest here today, but if we built in a neighborhood, preserve some areas where there's a little bit of a stream wetland that comes up there, and then radiate like a hand, radiate these streets out. I'm going to go to the next slide, in which I've overlaid what I'm describing here. So this sort of a lavender color, that part of the arc, I believe, would be from this point, you could view out over the hilltops. There's a hill here and a hill there. So this is a lowland, of course, through this stream. And judging from looking on Google Maps and zooming down and going up and down, I'm believing this is something I want to go out there and verify today, that we could possibly see out from that point. And this land even rises up a little higher back in here, that you can see I've drawn across the Holly Farm, that there's an even higher area than at this point. This is lower there. And I'm also wondering, from that point, could you see up at least, if there was a street from there to there, and of course still forest out beyond that, could you see all the way up to the knoll? So creating a neighborhood and thinking about how you connect both physically on streets, but also how you look out, how you can see out, how, even though you're far away from the ocean is still sort of a gathering place. It's something to feel connected to. And I think this is one of the things I remember convincing Casey Roloff of very early on with Bella Beach, that he had 10 acres that went deep in, away from the ocean, all the way up to Highway 101. And he didn't really think that the land nearby Highway 101, that end of it, was going to have any great value. And I designed a plan and showed him that if we cut a street that just went straight on out to the ocean and we cleared everything away and we made those candlestick cottages that had towers on both sides, you'd be able to see all the way back to the park and all the way out, from the park all the way out to the ocean. And that's a similar way of approaching this, that if you can create that kind of a view corridor as a street, you can draw the value of the ocean and the beauty of the ocean deeper into the inland. Yeah.
Well, inasmuch as the city is the property owner, and I'm going to take this from the standpoint of trying to make a profit, will your work include a market analysis to determine if this type of development will really have a market so that the city can recover its costs associated with it? And then second, where you're proposing the north end to be open space essentially, we currently have a development agreement that gives us 1,800 units. That has value. That agreement has value. Do you have any sense of the number of units we will have here, of what, and if we're going to lose our 1,800, say it drops down to 1,000 or something else, how we can take advantage of the value of that many approved units through a development agreement?
that's a great question, and the honest answer is I don't have a sense of the density of this yet. I conceivably should have and could have, and could at this point try to analyze that. Oh, absolutely. There is this market analysis done by Todd Chase of FCS Group, part of our team. And actually looking at this, I analyze it, but
Okay, in the preliminary financial feasibility analysis that Todd Chase did, he says the indicates favorable near-term feasibility for single-family detached and townhome type with land values of approximately $350,000 per gross buildable area, excludes unbuildable slopes, drainage areas, and public easements. This also equates to, and then it tells the price of the lot would be, for a townhome, would be about $60,000, for a single-family, $88,000. These estimates are considered to be an average land value amounts once adequate public infrastructure is available. Actual amounts may be higher or lower depending on unique site attributes and features. Apartment development would be $208,000 to $22,000 per acre. And then he says that upper end residual land values for those developments such as commercial, congregate care, hotel, and mixed use would be similar to the apartment category, plus or minus $200,000 per acre once fully served by public infrastructure. So we can use this as a basis when we come up with a plan to compare what that might be to the original.
yes, that's right. I mean, what the analysis by Todd Chase is prior to this plan, any plan, and the idea of building higher density in one area and not in another. And absolutely, by the end of this, we will, whatever we have laid on the ground, we will estimate what we will define the acreage that is actual net buildable area, and then we can create a matrix that would divide that up in, X number of single-family houses, X number of various types of housing, and see where we get to. In approaching that 1,800 units, and in what kind of a land area. And I think your question is to the point of, we can't say at this point that this is a finished strategy, knowing that 1,800 is a base case and is a financial, basis to that. In saying that we won't build on the northern ends. I think I could and should draw, this is what it could be if we wanted to build across that stream.
I just want to make sure that as we're going through this, we're not losing that important component, that the city has a significant investment in this, and that the funds that we receive from the sale of this property will not only repay back the city, but also be used for other things. So I want to make sure that as we go through this, that is kept in sight.
I had my hand up. Did you have your hand up? I would just like to ask how you will factor in, and I know this is, you're not going to come up with an answer immediately, but how are you going to factor in the long-term value of having open space and areas in the city that will draw people here due to the fact that they are hikeable, walkable areas where people can get away from development and have that open space, which is getting less and less available as our population increases overall. So I'm just hoping that you'll factor in the value of having non-built-on open space.
And I think what I'm hearing you saying is that the idea of the value of that open space as an attractor, as a destination, with the knoll at the top of that big broad space. Well, this whole space up here, when I say that big broad, the knoll is a small area, but this whole foundation or base of the mountain going up to it is a significant area. What might happen in those woods? Some sort of outdoor recreation, forest recreation, zip lines through the forest. I've heard an idea thrown out there. I mean, it could be a place where something is programmed in those woods as a sort of park-like setting that could attract folks.
I just want to give a little further response to Ron's statement. The 1,800 units that was approved up there is based on the allowed density, 7,500 square feet per unit. So that allowed density does not go away. But I want to add that probably that 1,800 was never realistic, economically and from an engineering standpoint, which is why we're doing this new plan to actually reflect those realities. You can also add that the density in the PUD is just set. That's you're allowed 1,800 units, for example, with this, but it can be put anywhere. So we wouldn't lose the number of units. And actually, with our new planned unit development rules, we have density bonuses for certain things. So you could get to, conceivably, you could get to a higher density than the 1,800 would allow.
And coming back to the fact that we have a development agreement that has 1,800 in it, and it's based on that, okay? And say it's not feasible, okay? The fact that we have the 1,800 is still of value, which you could do something like a transfer of development rights or something else where the value of those can be used elsewhere. And so I don't think we should easily give up that financial value that comes with it. I think we need to explore all of the options that, if it can't work here, are there other options that we have because the city has that value with that development agreement.
Changing subjects. The knoll, didn't we cut off 60 acres for the knoll? 40 acres? Okay, 40 acres. And there's another 40 north of it. 100 acres, rounded. That's big. So I don't know who said it's not very big, but to me 100 acres is quite large for open space. It's already done.
Yeah, okay. I was the one who said that the knoll was relatively small. And I wasn't referring to the area around it. I was referring to the knoll. So if you just draw a circle around the knoll and that's all there is, that's not adequate. And so with that other acreage, then maybe the knoll by itself. Right. Right. Yeah, right. I wasn't talking about the 40. I was talking about the 35. When you're up there, it's not that big. And it, right. Absolutely.
I think I know the answer to this question, but you, when you continue to work on your plan, can you seek ways to incorporate the open space, the non-development area, into your plan in terms of a series of pathways or other recreational opportunities? Because that could really increase the value of the homes and the apartments that are built down here if these folks know this is a resource. It's not a forest we don't have access to. It's an open space area that we do have access to.
Yes, I think that's a good point, that more than just a green swath, as I've shown it here, we should address those large areas of property with maybe a couple of options. One is showing the recreational activities that might be there, the trail system, the zip line, things like that, and showing how housing and neighborhoods could fit into that as well. And that, again, that might be, it might be a phasing plan. Like, many years from now, after building out this as a first phase core neighborhood, then you can address the areas north of that. Oh, there's a plan for it. We can try that out.
I appreciate that, but I think the opposite would be good. If there were ways, trails in there, and if people were more knowledgeable about what was there and the opportunities it provided, even if it is just a trail, whatever it is, that would draw more people to want to move there, and I think building would happen sooner. And anyway, I have a couple other comments, but I'll save them for later.
Something else to point out here, you see the circle, the delineated circle there? That is a quarter-mile radius from center to edge. And it's a dimension that we continuously work with. The idea has come up that it takes, long ago, that it takes 5 minutes to walk about a quarter mile. If you're on a relatively flat surface and you've got a good sidewalk, a good pathway, and you don't have to be rushing to go a quarter mile in 5 minutes, but it's roughly what it is. And that generally Americans will walk about 5 minutes from their home to a destination if it's a safe, convenient, and attractive environment to walk through. So that just gives you the sense of roughly what a neighborhood, 5-minute walking radius neighborhood could look like there. And, you can see that there's a little green that comes up to the north there, and it also lays out over into the Holly Farm a little bit. Was that issue with the Holly Farm delineated here? What is the effect of the school district purchase of the Holly Farm on the village's development? How do we want to involve school officials in this planning process? This was something that just came up less than a month ago, I think. This is when last couple of weeks, we learned that, wow, the school district has purchased the Holly Farm. That is in the process? For the sake of the microphone, the discussion in the room was saying, how good is that information that the Holly Farm is in process of being purchased by the school district, and it sounds as if it's valid and solid information that's moving forward. I can say that it's a very, potentially very attractive. It's a very disturbed piece of property from a natural standpoint, even though it looks like a farm from from aerial views. I've been told that the holly bushes are spreading up into the forest, and it's an invasive species, and it's problematic in that sense. Comparing that to the wild, of course, I'm sure this is a second or third growth forest up in the hills around the knoll, but it's a pretty rich, vibrant natural habitat. And to understand, to see the Holly Farm, that is very much it's not urban, but it's on the rural edge of that transect. It seems like it could be an ideal place for neighborhoods to grow. Yes. Yes, the addition of the Holly Farm into the city as a more, for building a school. School, I understand, is potentially what they're looking at it for. And ask the question, could then additional neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, also be a part of that? So that photograph early on of the adjacency of housing.
Information, because I don't know how much the school has released on this information,
Maybe I should. Okay. So maybe in studying this, we shouldn't draw full-blown plans on that land, but just maybe next week. But just recognize, as far as it's gone even here, just showing one street through it. Is that appropriate, you think, for the time being, or should we, think anything public be pulling that out?
We'll leave the Holly Farm for now. We have given you a handout with some questions on it, and I don't know if we have time to go into these here today right now, but these are primarily intended to provoke thought and discussion, and would hope that you give them some thought and give us your thoughts on these things so that we can work on incorporating things into the plan. So I think other than that, I think we are, well, with that, I guess, I think we've got to wrap this up here. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you all.